Hi, Jaime.
Hi, Trustee White. How you doing?
How are you? Could you do me a favor and send the link to Victor?
Yes.
He says he doesn't have it.
Sure.
What do you usually send it to? His
We usually send it out like to everybody. So I have to find Victor, that he has sent to me in the past.
here, I'll go in and see if I can, I'll forward the one. Can I just forward the one I have?
Yeah, you can forward the same one as you.
Okay, all right.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, Hami. Hi, Leilani. Hi, Dana. Somewhere.
Hi. How are you?
Fine, thanks.
Good.
Probably helps if I take my mic off mute, huh?
Mhm.
Hello.
Hi, Kate.
Hi, everyone. Those are some gnarly pictures, huh?
Yeah.
What
Poor
is
tree.
What is AMD?
Look, you
Oh,
know,
it's Ann Dormer. It's one of the schools nearby.
Isn't it like the middle school, one of them?
Yeah.
yeah. It looked though like they put unconsolidated asphalt around the tree and hadn't tamped it down. I wonder if somebody could just go in there with a
Full
shovel.
of tar?
Say that again. What?
Isn't
It looks-
asphalt generally full of tar?
Well,
Yeah.
it can be, it has to get consolidated. Otherwise it crumbles. I broke my ankle once at the edge of our driveway because somebody had patched it and it wasn't consolidated. They could what I mean is somebody could go in with a shovel and just get it out of there.
What I mean to say is that asphalt is just aggregate and tar.
Right.
So it's still dirty.
Oh, it shouldn't be there.
Probably not
Definitely
ideal
shouldn't
to
be
have
there.
it right next to the roof.
Right.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be
I
there.
mean, because they basically have now blocked the roots from being able to absorb any air or nutrients from the soil and the air itself, as well as having like good trickle down water supply. So
Right.
it's really messed up.
But they can get it out of there a lot easier than if it was concrete.
Yeah.
You just need to get it out of there. Somebody's bad idea.
Is AMD village or town?
It's town. They're right at the border. So I believe they are town technically.
All right.
Would the schools district have been responsible for doing that though? Is it on their property?
I don't know. I would have to look into that as far as like who is responsible for that, but it's whoever did it, I don't think really was paying attention.
No.
And yeah, it's just, I don't know exactly who would be the person to point the finger at, or if there's a particular protocol how they deal with this.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we need to like point the finger at it. We just need to determine who would be able to say yes and do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the guy out with the shovel
Yeah, exactly. Like,
and the pickaxe. It's not a good example for kids. You know.
No.
and it's kind of funny considering that we're trying to implement a tree ordinance.
Yes.
The timing is funny.
Yeah, actually, I spoke with a couple of people on the town EAC about it because I figured since it was a town in the town itself that this was something that they would be the right area to address. So Donna Sherritt said if we can do something as far as like writing a letter to the Board of Ed, maybe doing a joint village and town letter to address it and at least get the ball rolling to have it dealt with. So I'll sit down with her in the next like week or two. We have a tentative meeting time sometime in April. So we'll sit down and we'll discuss this and come up with something to send out to the Board of Ed. Or, you know, the school board, whoever it is would be that, you know, the next in line.
That makes sense.
Are we waiting for Victor? I mean, we know we're waiting for Stuart.
Victor said he sent you a request too, but I forwarded you my link as well. I forwarded him my link as well.
Let me see if there's anybody on the other side. There are a couple of people in the attendees. So let's check. We have Drusilla is in the attendees, and so is Stuart. So we're gonna bring them in.
Okay.
I'll be right back.
Hello, all.
Hello.
Hey, Stuart.
I apologize for the informal attire. I walked home and it was very warm.
Stuart,
my.
you know,
Yeah.
I was just gonna mention, I'm so proud to see you looking comfortable. You know, it's a nice sight. You're always so buttoned up.
Well, you know, that last hill is always a pain, but we did it.
So we do have a quorum. Hi, Sade. So I guess we should begin. Is everybody ready to go?
Yeah.
All right, wonderful. So we have Drusilla von Hengel here with us from from Project Mover. Sorry. So you're here tonight. You're going to give us a brief presentation, and we'll talk about what the project is all about and get some input from the rest of the EAC. I met with Drusilla about a month ago, I think, at this point. So we've had some early conversations about Project Mover. So we wanted to bring it to the rest of the council's attention. So if there was any feedback or suggestions or questions that you might have, Drusilla would be able to answer them for you. All right, so Drusilla, whenever you are ready, we're ready for you.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Drew Van Hengel. I am a senior principal at Nelson Nygaard, which is a transportation planning consulting firm, working with the village and some other stakeholders in the area to advance an application for an e-bike system for the village. And so I just wanted to spend some time as a follow-up to our field visits about a month ago to review the project with all of you all, let you know the status of our work to this date. And that's about it. So if it's okay with you all, I will share my screen and you'll all disappear for a second. So I'll have to get oriented again. And just as background for me, you should see my screen now, right?
Mhm.
Yep. Although working out of our Portland, Oregon office, also a Sleepy Hollow native, and my sister is an Ossining resident. So feeling really good about the kind of the possibility in the local context that this project is offering.
Is your
So-
sister Ginny?
My sister's Ginny.
And Hengel.
That's right.
Ooh.
Yeah. So she's been a great help in the background on this project also. Great. So I have about a 15-minute presentation, probably less, just giving some background to the project. So there was a mobility and parking management study conducted last year. Nelson Nygaard was the lead of that project with some other partners. Identified in that project, no surprise to all of you, is that transportation and mobility are a challenge for us people visiting, living, working in Ossining. For bicycling topography and walking topography is a substantial challenge, both from like the station to the village proper and then up Croton Road. There's like no shortage of hills, as Stuart described earlier, which are not the most pleasant for in lots of extreme weather conditions. transit, the Beeline service is reliable, but not frequent and circuitous. And during this study, it was illuminated that people wanted more non-automobile options to get to downtown, Metro North, Arcadian Shopping Center, other local destinations, but the nature of the fabric of the transportation options in the village don't really are kind of auto-centric. And electric bikes were identified as both a solution to the hills and to transform the daily lives of local families. And so we were lucky to learn subsequent to that project that NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, who is probably known to most of you also, am I right? Yeah, I won't go into detail about who they are, but what was advanced during last year was an opportunity to compete for a clean transportation prize. And the Clean Transportation Prize is meant to serve underserved communities. Applicants participate in 2 phases of competition for grant funding. And Project Mover, which is the subject of this conversation, was advanced past the phase 1 into the phase 2 planning. NYSERDA supported the first round of applications was unsupported with funding, but the second round that we're in right now was supported by some funding by NYSERDA to advance the best plan possible for each of the applicants. Up to $7 million in grand prize funding will be awarded to in the Electric Mobility Challenge, which is the challenge that we applied for this e-bike program. And there are 5 applicants who are advanced into this phase 2. 3 will receive funding up to $7 million. So the chances are pretty good if we do our work well, and the village residents, visitors, people who work there also believe that electric bikes would help to address mobility challenges. Those things in combination put us in good stead for possibility of funding. You got a lot of stuff going on right now, as always, in the village. There's some concern when we first started our phase 2 work for the planning for the application about how this work overlaps or contradicts or brings confused messages related to the downtown revitalization initiative. And we really see it as a complementary effort. The an e-bike plan and an eventual system will connect people to the places where that Austining will be investing in through this initiative. It will remove topographic barriers between locations of investment through the DRI. Electric bikes will support Main Street growth and mixed use development stemming from the DRI. And we see this infrastructure of bike share as a way to really improve access to the investments that will come out of the DRI. We did have some local meetings the same week as a public meeting. I guess that was about 3 weeks ago for the DRI, and we will continue to have we're in the same time frame for this brief period from March through June when the applications to NYSERDA are due. So we're trying to be very intentional about how this program is a potential connection to and not a competition with the DRI. So what does Project Mover stand for? Mover stands for Moving Onto Vast E-Micromobility Replication. The goal of the project, as it was stated in our initial application, is to put electric bikes within reach of every Austining resident and visitor, providing a suitable and viable option for people who don't wish to drive or need a quick and fun way to get around, or who don't have access to personal vehicles. We think that creating an e-bike system for the village will help with reducing what people are taking out of their pockets to pay for transportation, because the cost of fuel and cost of movement can be really reduced. There are potential job opportunities with an e-bike system related to operations and maintenance of the system. Also, as it relates to the places that people want to go, puts jobs, social activities, and groceries in reach of people simply and easily. And then also excited about the opportunity for this innovative transportation solution to create new innovative partnerships. And we're excited about designing a program that will support Ossining residents, and in particular those with low income and your resident population, your resident immigrant population. So we are designing a potential fleet as we speak right now. I'm going to talk about a lot of the engagement opportunities that we have underway, but basically the bikes for this system are being designed right now. That where the system will serve in terms of the dock stations are being planned and reviewed in the field currently to see like see about viable location placement. So we're really doing the work right now to kind of design the system from cost to availability to the bikes themselves. We have kind of landed on a shared electric bike fleet with convenient docking and charging stations to maintain them at power so that when folks come up to them, they are always ready to use. We are also exploring an affordable lease to own e-bike opportunities for folks who might want to not be in a shared pool, but take on their own e-bike. We anticipate working with the village to increase bike parking supply generally, so folks can use a bike to access any number of doors within the community that they might want to walk into to patronize, but might not be at docking stations. We're also designing how to complement the fleet with helmets and locks, and designing bike rider education and maintenance support to try to familiarize people with what the bike share system could look like and how it will operate. Maybe this should have been first slide. What is an e-bike? Short for electric bike, battery powered. You can see from this bike on the right, it's got a little more heft than your standard pedal bike in order to support the battery in particular. The electric motor is used to assist with propulsion. The maximum speed on these bikes is 20 miles per hour, and the range is around 20 to 30 miles for the full charge of the battery. And this is the type of bike that this project will, well, this brand of bike and this kind of style and look and feel is the bike that is our base. And that's, as I described, we're now talking about what are the amenities or the extra options that need to be put on the bike in order to make them usable and useful for transportation trips. As I mentioned, there are two kind of options in the system that we're planning to design. One is the docked bike fleet, where you begin a trip at a docking station, excuse me, and you end a trip at a docking station, and the duration of your trip determines the cost of the trip. And then the second option is a lease to own e-bike program, which we've learned through our first round of engagement that there is a lot of interest in that for a variety of reasons. I'm going to skip over to the next one. So how would it work? The system from start to end, you start by joining or creating an account. We're exploring opportunities for cash accounts. So for folks who don't feel confident sharing their personal information related to banking or being unbanked, but you go through a process to become accredited to be an e-bike user, whether it's through an app or through another third-party function. With that membership, you can walk up to a station and unlock a bike with a code, ride the bike, follow the rules of the road. That's part of our training material that we plan to disseminate and develop through the course of this project. And then return the bike to any station. It's a point-to-point system, not a round trip system. And at the time of docking the bike, the trip ends and the value of the trip is either debited for, well, it depends upon what type of payment option is selected, but that the trip is concluded and paid for at its end.
Okay.
So wanted to talk about, so we are, so how does one pay? We're, as I mentioned, we're developing the options, but the payment options, and we're also developing the pricing system. The pricing, the business plan overall at the moment, want to make the bikes accessible and scaled in terms of ability to pay, and also complement, like any transportation system, all of our transportation is subsidized in some way. It is so exploring what types of subsidy options there are for a program. But for the user, the options will be pay per ride, probably a flat fare, which consists of the unlocking plus the time spent. Passes for unlimited rides, which might be offered daily, weekly, or monthly. And then discount programs for users who meet income requirements. Important for this program, in our initial application to NYSERDA, we indicated that the village was the like the innovator of the program, but we also reached out to the town. We reached out to many adjacent communities who might be interested in learning from Ossning's experience. And so we did develop a multi-village incubator, which would serve as a knowledge exchange for Ossning and neighboring communities. And that with, as these neighboring communities go along with you and follow your progress, they'll be able to test and replicate the model related to the pricings, the support infrastructure, and community programming, ideally over time being able to develop a system which extends outside of Ossning into the town of Ossning, Terrytown, Croton-on-Hudson, and Dobbs Ferry. And we've learned of other interest in joining into this incubator since we started the program. And at the moment, we're sticking with this this team, so to speak, and we've met with village administrators in each of these places, in the town as well, but also met with, for example, Briarcliff Manor, who's expressed interest, and like the goal would be for towns that came into towns or villages that come into a program later, that the same system could be piggybacked upon, so so as to be more useful for all users. As we're thinking about where to place docking stations for the highest public benefit, we're looking at key destinations within the village, near transit stops, and in places where single car vehicle ownership is lower, and also where topography can be a challenge. Also, important about the bikes is that they're the bike share docking stations is that we are looking into providing electricity for personal e-bike recharging as well. And the kind of the terrain of all this work is we are getting help to navigating the terrain of what type of system would be best for Ossning residents, in partnership with some of your key community-based organizations who are being compensated to have small group conversations, to be a part of community meetings. We've got partnerships established with Hudson Link, Neighbors Link, IFCA, and Star Bethlehem Church. And they have signed on to help us do some of the community engagement. The best practice is always to have local community based folks host conversations where people feel comfortable really helping think outside the box creatively and to develop a plan and a system that will work locally. So we have put together three kind of categories of scopes of work that these community-based organizations are supporting us with, which are spreading the word about Project Mover in any variety and self-defined number of ways, helping to inform the program and the system design, and then if there is a win, helping to teach folks who live in the village how to use the bikes and how to pay for them and how to make them part of their everyday use. wanted to let you know before asking you some questions that there is a virtual public meeting being hosted by our team on April 11th at 6 p.m. Jamie will be socializing the social media opportunity this week. And also we're going to be one of the attendees or booths at the Earth Day event on April 23rd. We'll be there all day from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. We'll have the one or two bikes there for the event. We're still working out the logistics as to whether there would be any riding, but certainly there would be the opportunity to come and talk about the bikes and actually, see what we're talking about. And I think there is one in Village Hall right now. Any questions before I ask you questions?
One question I have is the physical infrastructure of making the streets safer for bikes also being addressed, whether it's part of this project or another one that the village is taking on? Because that's an important component of making this a feasible approach.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So we have identified some locations that we think would make good neighborhood greenways or bike boulevards. Those are low volume streets that where the speeds either are controlled with traffic calming or do tend to be lower so that people riding bikes can feel more comfortable. The village and we are kind of partnering on a cost estimate to really elevate some of the lower volume streets that can be connected with each other with simple signs and pavement markings that help drivers to understand that on these streets, you should expect to see people bicycling, and people will be bicycling not on the side necessarily, because we don't want people to be riding next to parked cars, for example, especially in high turnover locations, but more kind of central in the lane. And because those streets are already low volume and low speed, and we would expect that this bike share system would have more people on bikes, that type of connected infrastructure would be good for Austining. Those bicycle boulevards don't require parking to be removed. They don't require a trade-off in the number of lanes. They're very effective systems throughout the country. I was a skeptic actually of the neighborhood greenway until I moved to Portland, Oregon, and like my 6-year-old was riding with me, and didn't have to stay within a 5-foot lane, but was riding on these bike boulevards. So long story short is that we've identified some potential streets that would connect docking stations to low stress streets, and then low stress streets to each other, and low stress streets to destinations. And we'll be asking folks what they think about those streets at the upcoming meetings and at Earth Day, and also through these conversations that the community-based partners are organizing. And with our work on kind of defining that low stress network, we'll be able to put a cost to that improvement.
I have a question in conjunction with what Katie said. What is going to be the deterrence for people to ride their bicycles on the sidewalk, especially at the higher speeds, because it's so hilly? Going down Main Street is a big long hill, and our sidewalks are fairly well populated. How would we deter less courteous cyclists from avoiding that?
Is it a problem now?
Not a problem, but if you've got a teenager on a bicycle once in a while, it's not such a big deal. But if we're putting an infrastructure in that could be a different animal.
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. I think that the first deterrent is that the bicycles can travel at a much higher rate of speed than people walking. And so if you have crowded walkways.
Yeah, well, not everyone is all that courteous sometimes.
Well, but I wasn't actually talking about courtesy. I was talking about movement. So if you are wanting to go from point A to point B in the quickest path, our inclination as people moving is to not be deterred by the things that slow us down.
Yeah, I've been in Manhattan a lot, and I see how their bike lanes work. And you know, it's Manhattan. It's not Austin, but you know, you got a lot of people. You know, don't cross with the light, don't cross at the crosswalks. They just cross anywhere they want in Manhattan with all the trucks and traffic. I mean, Austin, it's not nearly as crazy. And you know, you see a lot of people who just kind of cross anywhere they want because it's, you know, and it's just occurred to me.
So what would you, so I would turn, there are obviously enforcement mechanisms for that, but we wouldn't want to build in like extra need for extra resources to enforce something that could be designed out. So I would ask you your suggestions as a stakeholder.
Well, I have another question is, you know, are there age limitations or age restrictions for using a bicycle that is a rental bike essentially?
Yeah, the qualifying age is still something that we're determining. The youngest age that we've seen a shared bike system accept is 16, but the standard is more likely 18. So, but we're still trying to get to that number.
If a bike is not returned to the slot, is there some sort of geolocation function on the bike for retrieval?
Yep.
Okay. And will all these signage, I'm assuming all signage will be multilingual?
All the information about the bike share use will be multilingual, but the regulatory signage that is on the street would be similar to what it is now, which is symbology in English language.
Okay.
So you're concerned about making sure that if the system gets into place, that riders stay off the sidewalks.
Certainly on busy times like weekends, like especially when we have the farmers market, there is a significant number of people walking to the farmers market, you know, during the weekends and stuff. I mean, during the week, I don't know, probably not as much, but you know, like you said, if you can design it out, that would be best.
Great. Thank
It's
you.
funny, like in the village, I find that when I'm driving, you have the opposite problem where people seem to think the street is where they're supposed to walk rather than the sidewalk.
Yeah, I was kind of alluding to that.
It's a long way to cross between the signal and the end of Main Street, and there are lots of places to go and parking, you know.
When driving down Main Street, one of the problems is people backing out of the spots. They're all slanted spots, so almost everyone is backing out of slots, and it's difficult to see a cyclist versus another car. A car can honk their horn or go, or you can do a lot of things, where a bicyclist kind of easily get guacked by a car as it's backing out of a spot, especially in a big SUV where your visibility is limited.
Well, I think part of what they're getting at with the program is that they would have specific streets that are allocated for that, and Main Street will most likely not be one of them because of whether people do it or not is another, you know, people are going to do it.
Well,
but as part of the program.
Yeah, I mean, have alternative routes is fantastic, but if you're going to go to Main Street to do shopping or run errands, go to the park, you have to go on Main Street at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the training program because that could give people, you know, more. I mean, I'm a cyclist. I've been bicycling since I was a little kid, and you know, I've been very fortunate. I've never been hit by a car, but I've been run off the road by a school bus when I was in high school, where he ran me right off the road into a ditch. So it is possible.
I think Victor did put his finger on a, well, what is the word I want to use? Kind of a pinch point when, downtown in the diagonal parking where you're backing it out, and the fact that it's one of the prime destinations, and that if one is going down to the train station, which is the other prime destination, it's going to, I can't see an alternative route, but there may be some, and I hope there are, that doesn't funnel people down that way. So it's certainly an area that needs to be looked at carefully. I know that the diagonal parking is what shall I say, a sacred cow for a lot of people, and having been hit by somebody backing out of one of those parking spots while I was stopped at the light, I'm always aware that it's a possible, I mean, my car, not myself personally. I'm always aware of the potential for people not seeing other people. So it's by no means a deal killer at all. It's just something that needs to be taken into consideration.
Folks, let me just add something in, two things. One of the few things that the village can do by law is to state where the e-bikes can be used.
Mhm.
They can't regulate a lot because Westchester County has decided not to regulate. And the law is written in such a way that Westchester, Nassau, Suffolk actually have certain exemptions, but only if the counties actually impose those exceptions. One thing that the village can do is they can say, you can bicycle, you can use e-bikes here, you can't use e-bikes there.
Mhm.
And that would then be a traffic regulation police would have to enforce. Simple as that. The other thing that, and Drew, I was talking to Evan, your associate on this. Just folks from a timing perspective, because June is actually very important. We actually have to have legislation on the books by June 1st to go ahead with this e-bike system. We don't need the license agreements because there will be agreements. Many of these docking stations may well be on village-owned property. So we're going to have to work out agreements with through Project Mover and Acton, which is the company that will be providing the bicycles. But the legislation to actually allow the e-bikes in the village, that's something that we're going to have to, I'm just letting Trustee White know this, sort of fast track, because in order to be eligible for the $7 million, the legislation actually has to be on the books by June the 1st. So I did get a draft of the legislation yesterday, and we'll start working on that. But so that's what happens next. Then there'll be license agreements with the village, because most of these are going to be on, village-owned locations. There, I think, from what I understood from Evan today, that's still being discussed as to exactly where those locations are going to be. So it's not
That's right.
something that's determined yet. But from the perspective of trying to, get us, in line for, potentially for the grant, we'll be moving, somewhat quickly to at least allow the e-bikes, and whether or not there will be, restrictions in terms of locations. That is something that is within the village's purview.
For
That's-
users that are looking to lease and I guess take the bike home and keep it at their own residence, is there a sort of insurance? Is that baked into the price? Or would that be something someone would have to, if the bike was lost or stolen or damaged, would they just file a claim and get a new bike? Or do they have to, a lot of people don't have, if they're income restricted, they might not have insurance if they don't have a car, and they have an apartment, and a car, they don't have any kind of insurance probably.
Yeah, I mean, that's a choice for a potential buyer to make, right? Once the e-bike leaves the village system, it's the village is not responsible for it any longer in any way, or the operator, I should say, not the village. But once it leaves the system, it becomes a personal bike, and so any coverage related to liability would not be covered by the system. That is covered by the system for the e-bikes that are in the fleet.
Well, if you've got, like, say, for instance, I mean, an e-bike might cost $1,000 or $2,000 to purchase. It's very expensive, right? If you was just going to buy one, if a person is, so, when you rent a car, you can get the insurance, which is an add-on, which might be an extra X dollars per day. Maybe you could have a lease program, which includes an insurance rider on a monthly basis.
Sure, until the bike is paid off.
Well, is this a lease to own, or is this just a lease to use? What if someone doesn't want to own the bike? Maybe they just want to use it and then every year hand it in and get it. Maybe one of the bikes get upgraded and they don't want that bike.
We're hoping to discover the real market for the lease to own, but it's not the there are two options at the moment. One is lease to own, and we've heard from some community-based organizations that that's an appealing, that's appealing not only because you always have a bike available to you, but also it's a credit builder. It's an opportunity to, mainly that's what we've heard. But the terms of the lease are still being developed, and I would doubt that I would assume, I think that it would be possible for the liability coverage to follow the bike while it is still owned by the system. But once it is owned by somebody else, I can't imagine that being possible. But we can bring your comment back and see if it is.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's helpful. So any other questions before I respond to my questions?
Just one quick,
Yeah.
going back to how you're talking about connecting with all of the other communities. I seem to remember there's a project, maybe now abandoned, that was going to put together basically like a long walking path along the Hudson. Does that ring a bell with anyone?
Yeah, there's a name for it. I think they're still doing it.
Yeah,
I know
mean,
that we had discussed it during when we were doing the comprehensive plan recently. It came up in conversation. I don't know. There's plans for it. I don't know if there's anything like with legs that's walking yet where they're doing something to create it, but there's plans that were considered so that when it does actually happen that we're supportive of it.
Gotcha. Okay, because I remember we had that when we were discussing a couple of proposals for business development, like actually down on the waterfront. That was something that we had to keep in mind. I think it was when we were talking about 3 Westerly, is that that there had to be included space to allow this essentially like greenway trail to go through. In any case, that that would be an excellent. I know that I believe there's funding or grants that are associated with that, to include this project mover or to attach the project mover to that as a way of it's a funding source. And also, it's as I understand it, it's supposed to go all the way almost into Manhattan, or to the city. So, that would be an excellent path for the e-bikes to be on. So that's it.
That's great.
It's not really a question as much as a statement.
Drinking water more fun.
Right.
From your kind of purview as the EAC, do you see this program as supporting village environmental goals, and in what ways, if you do?
I see.
Reducing auto traffic. I would love to be able to reduce the number of parking spaces downtown, so we can actually open up the downtown area with like trees, green spaces, just unpave it a lot would be lovely. But yeah, I can't imagine a program that would be more supportive. Yes, I can, but of our environmental stuff.
What Leilani said.
Yeah, short of like redoing all the roofs of the village buildings into solar panels and green roofs and living walls. So.
But yes, getting more, whatever auto traffic we get off the streets is a definite plus, and it will really help. I can see it helping that. Not everything, but it's an incremental change, and it will also encourage, I hope, more people to use public transit, because they'll be able to get down to the train station without having to take a taxi or having to take a car.
Yeah.
There can be a reasonably high incidence of people double parking or something like that, where it makes it difficult enough for cars to get around. You see this on Spring Street very often. If you've got bicycle, if Spring Street is considered one of the roads that would not be ideally, I don't know if the side roads are susceptible to double parking and other less courteous standing behavior that we see. Is that something you've seen in other communities?
The nature of the kind of businesses that are using Spring Street and their need for having double
Well-
parking happen sometimes and auto serving uses. I actually think Spring Street is a fascinating case study that we could talk about at another time, because it is moving at precisely the speed that is safe for bicycling. I mean, it moves very slowly. People are doing this crossing that you described in multiple locations to get from their parking space to the place they're going, or the place they're going to the next place. There are auto serving businesses along the route, which, you know, sometimes means that either there's loading happening or there's actually a car waiting to get into the place that they're going to do their business at. So it's a type of street that is exactly at the right speed for a neighborhood greenway, but it's not quite a neighborhood greenway because it's got all these like, it doesn't, it's just a very different street. For me, it feels like a street that is essential to connect bike share to, because there are a lot of places that people want to visit, patronize there, and more, it'll be easier for people to get there than it is currently by car. So that'll be for the public to tell us about whether, to Kate's point, whether Spring Street is designated as a place for bicycling, or rather it's a place that people bicycle on, because we know that people will.
The fact that Spring Street is a two-way street now, it still amazes me. And I think that's what keeps the traffic so slow. Because I remember when it was one way, and when it changed, I was like, it just became this slow, giving people, you know, there's no space for the bus to go down.
Like, it's
the
a giveaway street.
properly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And across the world, streets like that are exactly the places that people want to bike and walk along, because it's the traffic can't go by quickly because there's not enough space. Are there design elements for the bicycles themselves or the system that you'd like to see us incorporate to help reduce vehicle mileage traveled and demand for parking, and anything about how you like the bikes to be configured?
From a
Baskets.
very, very basic standpoint, yes, baskets, places to hang their bags.
Yeah.
What do they call them? Panniers, you know, we can stuff.
Yeah.
Because if people are taking them to the market, even to their laundromat.
Oh yeah.
They need a way to be able to carry cargo.
Yes. Saturday on Spring Street is like a laundry day.
Yeah.
If you were to spend any time between the mechanic there, whose car is going in and out all day long, and the laundromat across the street, and it's like Grand Central sometimes.
Yeah.
So when you say baskets, it's like, do you mean like baskets that you can attach to the front, or do you mean like baskets that could be attached to the back and pulled along as part of?
Yeah.
Or
Okay.
both, or something like a saddlebag kind of arrangement.
The more the merrier, because if you're going to go to the farmer's market and you might have, your fruits and meats and vegetables and all these other things, right? And it's like I walk it because I'm close, but not everyone's that close.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you could do like a separate e-trailer that they can rent in addition to the bike to attach to the bike.
Oh,
Or
especially like if they have little kids and they have the little trailers that go on the back of the bike for the toddlers and the babies.
I don't think you're allowed to attach those to an e-bike because they go above 20 miles, or because they go 20 miles an hour.
Maybe you could hack. Maybe put the limiter if you put something on. I don't know.
Yeah,
I think
that's
that's where
interesting.
the insurance liabilities might come in with the
Yeah.
age thing.
Yeah.
So because it's a mechanized vehicle, that's there will be limitations on how it could be used for like family outings.
yeah. I thought about that. I'm like, oh my gosh, oh no, that would be so dangerous.
Yeah.
At first, I was like, oh, that'd be no.
And I am trying to be realistic here, because it's not going to solve all the programs. It's not going to work for everybody. I'm 70, I'll be 74 in 2 weeks, and I haven't ridden a bike in 30 years. So I'm not the ideal group, but that's fine. That's cool, because there's a lot of people who would
Do you have
welcome this.
bikes available for those whose balance is a potential issue?
Yeah, we just talked about that this morning, and it looks like Acton does not have a accessible bikes at the moment. It's not in their supply chain currently, but it certainly could be something that it could be something that a vendor could build in over time. I'm not saying that they will, but that if we hear enough demand for more accessible bikes, then that's something that they can plan for, especially if they're in 100 different cities across the world. So if they're hearing this,
I would
know,
be
it might-
totally supportive of that. As a mom to a child with a disability, that would be like an amazing thing, that if that could happen, whether it be with this rollout or in the future, that would be a wonderful addition.
Mhm.
Also
Great.
tandem bikes.
I like your creativity here. Thank you.
Also, what was I going to say? But aren't e-bikes just by design a lot more stable than a regular bicycle?
I don't
thought
know
I
if
heard
that's
that.
true or not.
I thought I heard that.
Looking at it from the flip perspective, would you warn us or inform us about any barriers that you foresee for e-bike adoption in the village?
Having bike racks in front of establishments that a lot of congregating happens. There's coffee shops, there's like Doka's, there's a restaurant where people like just hang out. And or if you want to go over to the boathouse and just having just a regular bike rack to put the bike somewhere when you spend a half hour to an hour somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I would think the most feasible thing to do would be to replace parking spaces with bike racks. I mean, I think that just makes it easy to pull in and out. However, there's a very strong perception in the village, especially, that there isn't any parking downtown, even though there's quite a lot. So you're going to get a lot of community pushback if you start talking about replacing parking spaces with bike racks. I think that's exactly what you should do, because the less parking we have downtown, the better. It's a mess. But it's an entrenched idea.
And I see an indirect way this is going to support our environmental goals. I think people who are looking for a place to move, especially younger people, who are motivated to sustainability, will look at the way Ossining is committed, showing that it's committed to reducing its carbon footprint by having these e-bikes around, that they can have a lifestyle that doesn't rely on a car, and that they would be moving to a place that's committed to this, would, I think, encourage people to move to the village, that kind of person, as well as serving people now who don't have transit, all of the communities that we have now.
This might be like the first step towards introducing a senior tuk-tuk program for the village.
Say that again, Leilani?
Using e-bikes as I think they're called tuk-tuks. They're basically like little carriages. You've seen them in India, and as a senior program.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that the number of people in our village who do not own cars and who, aren't terribly well-to-do are older people. And, we have an entire building for senior housing. And a lot of the people who live downtown are older people. And I'm just not sure how practical e-bikes would be for them, I think it's a great idea. I'm certainly willing to try. I mean, I live close to downtown, but I'm not sure I would try to navigate Route 9 and all that on a bike. It's scary enough in a car, but
that would not be on our map of low stress streets.
Yeah, I think that if you're already downtown, it'd be also great for the waterfront, because if somebody lived down on the waterfront, there's going to be more people living down on the waterfront. There's going to be a new apartment building on Water Street. That'd be probably great to have a bike rack there. And you can get uphill, and then you can get downhill, and you can ride around the waterfront on the road. You really can go around and around and around. So you can get on your bike and go to the boathouse or go across, because you can't go across the tracks. You have to go all the way around. So that it could be, I think to have a rack on the waterfront would be great. I'm sure the developer wouldn't mind having one at his building, but that's a few years away, a couple years away.
Well, I think also that gives us time to kind of build in a culture for people that, get used to the idea of biking. Because part of it, I think, will also be like people will need to have a little bit of a cultural shift to move away from the automatic assumption. I'm just gonna get in my car and go. But we have time to work on that. Those are things that I think that we can start initiatives for, and disseminating information as this program moves along. So, but things that we should consider, and, especially if we're at the waterfront, that can be that hill. Walking up that hill can be a deterrent sometimes from going up and down.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And this might be is more in Stuart's wheelhouse, but I'll ask you, Chair Schlott, you review land development permits as a committee currently and make bike parking recommendations. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Can
We've made a few.
Can you foresee a future review which might also recommend bike docking stations for e-bikes, or like some places are reducing parking requirements through the land development process, which would happen at the Planning Commission, but with recommendations from transportation committees, say, reduce the parking supply, but in exchange, provide the community benefit of bike share docking, bike share, Zipcar.
It's possible. There are a number of things that have come up already, and that I know will be coming in the future, but these are things that we could definitely talk to them about, and at least introduce the idea if it's something they haven't thought of before, have something that they would be willing to consider incorporating into some of their plans.
There's no mechanism in the code right now to allow the planning board to lower the parking requirement by doing something like that. And so I think that recommendation is really something that the Board of Trustees need to hear, if you're making it, because they're the ones who would be able to actually advance something like that. So the way that our code works is, generally speaking, if the Board of Trustees wants to see something like that done, they would forward that recommendation to the planning board for the planning board to come back with some general recommendations on how to make it work, and then we'd go from there. It can come from the planning board back to the trustees, but I think the idea of allowing the planning board to sort of lower the parking requirements by allowing some alternative methods like this, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, they do it. It's just a matter of, the Board of Trustees showing interest in seeing something like that.
Yeah, thanks for that information.
I've got a question. Let's say someone is going to use the bike to go to the train station to commute into Manhattan because they don't want, because parking can be expensive. If they don't want to lease to own, they just want to use it. How does the economics work versus a weekly, monthly versus a one-time usage? Do you have round numbers for?
I don't, because we haven't figured out the business plan as it relates to the long-term kind of subsidy components. I don't want to put any false numbers in front of you, but I would say as a bike share user, potential user, the person would say, am I going to do this once and pay a little bit more for it this one time, or is it going to be something I'm going to do every day? And then if I'm going to be doing it every day, I would get a pass that supports more use of the bike.
If the program doesn't pan out financially, is the village on the hook for?
Nope.
No, is this completely?
It's the operator's burden to operate, and the village, maybe Stuart wants to weigh in too, because he's had more of these types of conversations with Evan, but the village would be allowing the operations to happen.
It's kind of like a concession almost.
That's a good analogy or metaphor.
Basically, we would license the space to them, but they would provide it, Acton would provide insurance. The village would be named as an additional insured. there's no expense incurred on the village's part.
All right. Is there a minimum amount of time that they have to give this a trial before they, I don't know, change their mind?
I want to just keep this on environmental questions at this point. These are more detailed questions about the program itself. I think that can probably be answered on Earth Day or possibly a future discussion, but I think we should steer it to mainly dealing with environmental questions.
Yep, that's great. Thank you, Chair.
And I want to make an observation on that. The first question is, in what way can it support the village environmental goals? And I think it can. I think we should also be realistic in the sense that there are many parts of the population that wouldn't be able to access this. Which doesn't negate the value it has as being an incremental part in supporting our environmental plan. We have to be realistic that, say, mothers with children, I'm thinking of the people I see walking on the street, mothers with children, the elderly, we would not be necessarily part of the e-bike users, but there's a significant number of people who would. So it's not a magic bullet, but it's a good piece.
If this is wildly successful, what about the battery recycling aspect of the operator? Has their sustainability policy taken that into account?
I haven't reviewed their sustainability policy, but due to the fact that they're operating in Europe, I would say it probably does, but we could provide some more information to you with more time.
Is a possibility of having solar canopies where the bike racks, the charging stations are? Is that an option?
Yes, is that something that you're asking for?
Yes. Well, I'm asking, I mean, is that a possibility? Okay.
Great. Well, I think we covered it. I hope you'll come to the virtual meeting, and if not, that you'll stop by the booth at Earth Day and check out the bike and our colleagues and answer some more questions there that are both environmental and just pragmatic in nature.
I'll definitely see you on Earth Day. I'll be down there.
Great.
I'll be down there also.
Great. Well, thanks for the time. We really appreciate your dedicating part of your agenda for this item.
Thank you for coming. It's very apprecited.
Very
Sure
exciting.
thing. Great. I'll leave now. I'll
Have
stop
a
sharing
good
my
night.
screen first, I guess. Oh my, I can't find my cursor. You can just boot me out, whoever's in control. There we go. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Night, thank you.
Okay. That was a lot to take in, I know. So I actually met with Drusilla a few weeks ago, and we had discussed some of the project beforehand. So we wanted to bring it to you to view. We had talked about the possibility of where the roads, which roads would be best for bike usage. So Spring Street was one of those issues where we weren't really sure because of the fact that it is part of a state trail, but at the same time, because of the issues with traffic, it was a concern. But we can talk to her again, I guess, when they do the virtual meeting, and I definitely will talk to her again on Earth Day when I'm down there. Does anybody have any follow-up questions or comments before we move on? No. So I see here we have the Clean Path New York. Is that still on the agenda? Was someone supposed to come for that, or no, it's just for us to discuss?
Yeah, so it is an LWRP application, and because it's going through the state is lead agency here in reviewing this. And so they sent it to us so that, so you can take a look at it if you're interested. They didn't come today. Frankly, it's a survey, so it's not really, let me sort of back up a little bit here. So there's a plan to connect the two grids. So apparently there's this story of two grids in New York, right? There's the majority of power in New York State is in the downstate region around New York City. in the surrounding areas. And that part of the grid is primarily powered by extremely dirty power. There's a lot more coal peaker plants. There's a lot of different, just generally dirty power. The power in the northern grid, which I think covers everything sort of north of essentially Ossining, I believe, has this different kind of energy. So it's all considered renewable, or largely 70% renewable. I don't have the full facts and figures on it, but the goal of this project is to create a long extension cord, essentially, from the northern grid and connect it down to the southern grid, so that the downstate region can take advantage of that clean power that exists in the north. And so they're trying to come up with a strategy of where to do it. They're gonna largely try to stay in the river, but there are sections of the river that they need to avoid due to, I believe it was like a turtle, there's some sort of endangered species that they need to avoid in the Croton Bay, I guess it is. So they need to, go ahead.
It was a turtle that they were afraid of hitting with the equipment.
Exactly. So they need to figure out where it's going to go. And so they're going to go through this process of figuring it all out. They have to do this survey. They still haven't determined the final route here in Ossining, but this is essentially allowing them to do that survey. So there's not a lot to say, frankly. If you don't have any comments, and that is the comment, you're not required to provide any comments, and it's not going to be anything that's reviewed internally here. So it's not like a local application where there's a planning board that's going to be necessarily paying too much attention to it. It's kind of from the state. They were, I mean, when we got the email, they were like, is there anybody here that even wants to look at it?
Well, I will admit that I did read through the report. And I mean, it seemed like they were just going to drill some boreholes into certain sediment samples, and from what they described, it didn't seem like it was going to be, for the majority of it, really all that intrusive in most of the areas. But the area around us was where it kind of got a little weird. Not that there's really much that I would be able to comment on, and I think it was because of where we are, they were trying to avoid that, or couldn't be in the river. But as far as from what I saw, like, it didn't seem like it was anything really that was like out of the ordinary. I wouldn't really, I don't know, I really wouldn't know. I mean, it seemed pretty straightforward to me.
Yeah. There is a bit of a time crunch if you want to get any comments in. I'm just trying to figure out where.
Yeah, I saw they said they wanted to start the first, if they could, they wanted to start by May 1st.
Well, it's worse than that.
Oh.
So the time frame is the letter went out. I mean, it came to us on a Monday or on a Friday, March 4th. So technically, you got 30 days.
So it's today.
Yeah. So if you wanted to send something in, I mean, you could send it in now. I mean, we could argue that it was impossible to, at that point, to get it in on the LWRP if you wanted to get comments in. But it's really, you're kind of at the end of this, obligatory comment period.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that I feel is worthy of dragging it out just to argue over semantics of dates. But I read through it. It seems pretty straightforward, and based on what they had put in, it didn't seem like it was something out of the ordinary based on what they had shown in the past of what had been done with other pipes.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any thoughts or comments?
Well,
I just had a chance to start scrolling through it. I'm looking at the plan. It does look sort of funky. Looks like in Ossining, they kind of come up on the shore. And
yeah, they do. They come down Route 9 for a ways, and then they go back. Their discussion right now is about trying to go in maybe somewhere around Hengel Park. So maybe the southern end of Hengel Park. But they have not really made any final determinations about where they're going to be going. So coming off Route 9, they're looking at, potentially Main Street, potentially Snowden. And I think they're open to considering other things, but there's a lot of different factors. That's stuff that's kind of,
Well, this was also this was just collecting the sample part of the pipe. They're not laying anything down. They're not doing any construction. This is just them going in and taking some samples to see what's there.
That's correct. So, I mean, I think by the time they actually get to that point, we'll know a little bit more about it, and there'll be more to discuss. But
I mean, I'm fine with a non-response because I don't really have anything to say unless anybody else wants to add anything. All right, and then we have the village tree ordinance as the continuing business of the board. So there were some people who weren't on the call before, so just in case, just a recap, I sent an email out earlier regarding a situation that happened at AMD. AMD, as far as I know, is town property, or at least in the town boundaries. I have spoken with people on the town EAC, specifically Mitzi Elks and Donna Sherritt, to discuss what happened. So the trees were basically, what would you say? Not necessarily concrete, but
Asphalt.
asphalt. They were asphalted up to the trunk of the tree, and there are probably, I don't know if it's as many as 20, but almost, all of the trees in a portion of AMD that were covered with asphalt. So going forward, I will be speaking with Donna in a couple of weeks to draft a letter so that we can have the issue addressed. So for those that were not present earlier, if there are any comments, if you haven't seen the pictures, I did email it out earlier, and I included a video link. If you can't open it, let me know, but I included a video link just to show that it is completely blocked up over the roots.
Have you gotten any sense of why that was done? Like if that was for, the only thing I was thinking was like maybe they were trying to prevent people from like tripping on the roots, but like the roots are gonna grow through, right? So
I don't know what the thought process was behind it. It was brought to my attention recently, and people were very upset when they brought it to my attention. So I don't know what anyone was thinking in that sense. It's hard to it's in both the town and the village tree ordinance that that type of treatment of the tree is not allowed. So it's whether they wanted to cover the roots or thought it would be a good idea to do that is kind of, it doesn't really matter. Was
this an
I don't know
outside
why they did it.
contractor? Was this an outside contractor or the village?
No clue. No clue. I have
Victor, it
no
wouldn't have
idea.
been the village. It's
No, this was-
AMD is not in the village.
So I'm just bringing it up because in speaking with the town EAC, they did ask if we could do some sort of a joint letter together. So I'm going to sit with Donna and go through it with her. But I don't know if this was an outside contractor. I don't know what the history was behind how it happened or who authorized it. So that's something I would have to look into.
What I observed in looking at the pictures, I can't open it right now, they look like they're quite mature trees. It wasn't like somebody just put in these little trees and then decided to, and that there was a concrete, it looks like a not concrete, asphalt playground around it. And it may have been that they were put in with at least some sort of tree well around them, and that someone thought, let's make this neat and put in more asphalt. So the material that's directly around the tree is actually not consolidated. It's like somebody took a bag of the asphalt and just dumped it in.
so I apologize, folks. I wanted to jump in. I gotta jump in here real quick. I know Stuart has done some work on this tree ordinance, and we really want to talk about that. That's gonna take some time.
Yeah.
AMD is a school that has no jurisdiction with the village. So if the board would like to maybe circulate a letter and send a letter to tell them to fix it with some recommendations, I think that'd be fantastic. But I don't know that it's a great idea to spend too much time here,
Okay.
considering the tree ordinance, which we do have control over, is going to take some time to discuss.
Okay.
Understood. So then I will do that. I will circulate a letter. I'll talk to Donna and we'll move on. Got it. So I did see the tree ordinances that were sent out yesterday. So I did see that those came, and I did have a chance to look through some of it, or I looked through all of them. It was a lot.
You ain't seen nothing.
Oh boy.
But no, thank you for that, Kate. It's interesting because while the village's tree ordinance has some aspects that need to be revised, the fact of the matter is, in many ways, it's very consistent with many of the other ordinances. If you go to some of the, I like to call them the horsey communities, like Bedford, or you go to like the Gold Coast of Long Island, and you looked at some of theirs, Brookville and things like that, their tree ordinances go on and on and on, but most of their ordinances deal with public trees. They don't dare touch trees, on someone's own property, which is what, most of the ordinances that we have up here deal with. There are a few things in the village's code which I think have to be changed. We have, for some weird reason, that you need a permit, if you're essentially going to carelessly or negligently take down a tree. It doesn't really make much sense to me why that was put in that way. So that's something that has to be worked on. I will say this one thing that the town of Ossining has, which I think would be something to consider, is they have a specific statement that, issues relating to trees go to their EAC from the planning board. It is an actual referral. What we have now, part of that is and I think that's important, but for you folks to work in conjunction with, the village's arborist, or what's referred to in the code as the tree warden, who basically will look at the permits and see exactly what has to be done. What we don't have in our code, and what other codes do have, is one, if you are permitted to take trees down but cannot replace, what do? You create a tree fund, for example, which is what a number of municipalities have. They have a fund which you can essentially pay into, so that if you take down X diameter breast height of trees and you can't put this similar replacement in, you have to pay for it to a certain amount. In the town, that amount is actually set by the town board, or if you have to do off-premises planting, which often happens, the town board in the town of Ossining has to do that. We have a situation now, this board may be aware of it, and Jaime certainly is aware of it, with property at 14 Water Street, where in that particular case, there will be off-site planting, which will be done under the auspices of, I believe, both DPW and REC, because it depends where the trees are going to be put. And there will be a provision, for example, that if the trees have to be essentially maintained for a period of 2 years, if within 2 years the trees die, then they have to be replaced by the owner, by the person who put them in, which are things that our code alludes to it, but does not specifically say it. So I think that's important. What you see in some other municipalities is that, for example, if you're taking down 20 trees with a combined diameter at breast height of, let's say, 500 inches, you have to replace at least 50%. And if it's a large mature tree, you're not going to go out and force the person to get a similar large tree. They have to get X number of trees that equate to the DBH. All those things, I think need to be specified more in the Austining code than they are now. One other thing that I think is important is that we often get complaints in the building department of people saying, well, you know, this neighbor has a tree on the property, it's leaning over and he's not doing a damn thing about it. And what am I supposed to do? Austining does not have a provision for that, but other municipalities do, which is essentially you go to the appropriate homeowner, you say, listen, the tree is leaning, the tree is falling, the tree is going to do something. You got to do something about it. Person doesn't do anything, you give them 30 days, they don't do anything. Then you give them a 10-day warning and say, if you don't do it in 10 days, we're going to come in, we're going to take the tree down. And whatever the fee is, we're putting it on your next tax bill. So you'll pay us that way. We do that with a number of things. If you don't clear your snow and ice off the sidewalk, we basically take the bill and we put it on your tax bill. If you don't cut your grass back, we put it on your tax bill. Because fact of the matter is, you'll get paid that way. You may not get paid if you just send them a bill, but if you're going to put it on the tax bill, you'll get paid because the interest adds up. But I think that when you look at some of these, you know, different ordinances here, where you start with the villages and you go to some of the other ones, they all start with the same objective, which is the importance of trees, both from an ecological standpoint, from a human standpoint, from an environmental justice standpoint, and why you need the trees and why you need them there. Then how do you go about essentially protecting the trees? You know, what has to be done? And I'm separating here public trees, which are trees are on within rights of ways, public property, parkland or anything like that. That's really under the auspices of DPW and the rec department. And pretty much they have the right to do really what they need to do with the trees. I know one of the things, Kate, you had mentioned and others had mentioned is what do you do about utilities who essentially come in and essentially butcher the tree? And a number of municipalities do have regulations. First of all, in terms of the types of trees that you can plant under utility lines. They can't go up more than, let's say, 10 feet. So that they can't, basically, the crown will not go that high to create a problem. Other municipalities basically have it that the utility has to comply with, I think it's the National Arborist Society rules with regard to trimming under utilities. And I'm not dealing with emergency situations, but just basically what they have to do. All that I think could be in there, you know, and you could also just require the municipality, which they do now. I mean, kind of does come around. They may put something on your door, but they're going to say, we're going to be doing tree trimming. And then you come back the next day and you said, I thought there was a tree there. And, you know, so those are things that can be put in there. It's not as easy, though, dealing with the utilities, because in most cases, they're going to say, well, it's an emergency because it's basically on the lines or it's coming through the lines or whatever. So that's something to deal with. But I think that the basic issues that you want to cover are in the village's code. I just think there is, it could use to be supplemented and beefed up a bit to make it clear. I will say this, and Jaime, if you disagree, you can let me know. We have a very astute planning board. It is very much aware of tree issues. Thanks in large part to you folks, but they are very much on top of this. And I don't think that they would object to a referral to you folks if there was an issue relating to trees, to basically see what's happening. And it's not just necessarily trees, it's also just the brush that's there, dealing with getting rid of invasive species, which is very important. You know, all those kind of things. You may notice, Kate, when you look through some of these, a lot of these ordinances actually list the types of trees that you can plant, specifically in public areas. But one of the things they're very clear on is you cannot put in any invasive species at all. And they're very clear on that. And that's something that you want to, I'm sorry, Kate, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you that about that as well, because that was something I saw. I forget which one it was in, but there were, as you were saying before, specific trees that can be planted under utility lines. So if we put something like that in, what happens if you're a property in a retroactive case where you have a giant evergreen tree that's grown so tall that it actually goes over the tree lines, and they're basically cutting out like a box into your tree. Like
Right.
what?
Two things. I think if you're dealing with a new development that's going to have trees that will be near utility lines, I think it is important to have something that you can only have this particular specimen of tree. It can only grow to a certain height. I think some of the municipalities, they do what they basically call small, medium, and large size trees. And they basically go, I think it's small is up to 10 feet, then medium is, let's say, 10 to 40, and then above 40 is large size. And generally, the small are the only ones you can have plant new under utilities. With regard to trees that are already there, all you can probably do is to put something in that the utility needs to be cognizant of the fact that they can't come in and essentially, I think one of the ordinances you can't essentially cut the crown by more than 30%. So you can't do it. So essentially what you've got is you're killing the tree by taking more of the crown off. Again, it's not as easy dealing with the utility companies on that. The people who do their tree cutting are generally, I think, contractors. It's not Con Ed directly. They have people who come in and just do it, but it is something to deal with. But I think in terms of new projects that may come up, or if a tree dies and a new tree is going to go in, you can only put a tree up that goes to this height because of that particular location. And that's certainly something that can be looked at and make sure that it is, something that is from here. I know the county has a list. Cornell Cooperative Extension has lists of types of trees that are permissible in various areas. But here, what's important is not just, I had someone called me up 2 weeks ago. He lives on Pine, and the brook is right in back of his house. And there are trees in the brook that are leaning and basically about to fall onto his house. So he didn't know what to do. And so we got the arborist out there who said, actually, there are 3 trees that are leaning and they need to all be topped because otherwise they will hit this guy's house. And so that's, at least the benefit of having the arborist go out there to look and see what the issue is. We had this on another property on, I think it's Revolutionary. We had someone who took down 9 trees and without a permit, and said they were all sick and diseased. And the arborist came by and looked at the stumps and said, no, they were not. So beyond that, he'll probably get fined. You had to pay $1,000 for the permit, because if you do the work without a permit and then get the permit, you pay either $1,000 or 3 times the cost of the permit, whichever is more. $1,000 is always more. So he wasn't thrilled about it, but that's what happened. But I'd like to hear, from you folks, what you would, and I know I sent you a lot of these ordinances, and I apologize. It's one of the things I do is I just go through e-codes and I find different ordinances and see what they do. Particularly, I like to see what they do upstate, because it's totally, they do things differently. In one upstate place, you can't tie your horse to a tree. Well, that's still on the books, I guess, in certain communities. Okay. But in terms of the Ossining code, from what you've seen, as I said, I do think a referral from the planning board on certain, if it's a site plan relating to trees, it's not a bad idea, hear what the EAC has to say. And that's something that could, that could happen. As I said, I think the planning board in its current composition is very much aware of those kind of things. But if there's anything else that you folks think should be in the tree ordinance that we have now to bolster it up, please let me know. We can talk tonight, or you can send me an email and I can then start to sort of rough out the draft based upon what we've got here. And by the way, you don't have to go through all of those ordinances I sent to you. If you basically look at just really when they require permits, which is really the important thing, because generally permits are not required for emergency situations, but you still have to, even in the village's case, you still have to at some point let the building department know that you did the work so that it's done by a certified arborist. It's not done by someone who has literally no knowledge of how to take a tree down. We require, proof of insurance and all those other things. So if you have, comments as relates to, what the code is and how it should be worked on, please, happy to hear.
I think one thing that I noticed was, like you just mentioned about, someone cutting down trees that were like reportedly, diseased. I think having some sort of language about like dead or dying trees might be useful, because it's like, who's determining whether it's dead or dying. If it just gets removed and then it's assessed after the fact, then that leads to other issues.
Well, correct, Sade, and that differs from an emergency. So it's one thing if the tree is dead or dying, then, most likely the arborist would look at the tree and say, okay, come down. It's, it's diseased or it's infected or whatever. In the case on Revolutionary, I think the claim that they were dead or dying was sort of more after the fact than the person just wanted to take the trees down, to be perfectly honest. And someone in that neighborhood, which is a historic neighborhood, dropped a dime, as they used to say, or I guess now it's dropped a quarter, and basically got written up and is now in the justice court with regard to that. But you can distinguish the two, because if they're coming in and saying there's a problem, the trees are dying, what would happen is we get the permit application and the building inspector would send the arborist out, would look at the trees, would come back with a report. He may say, well, that tree is not. I should point out the fact that a tree is leaning does not mean it's dead or dying. It simply means that it's leaning. But if they were to see some that it's infested in some way, or that it's basically not going to survive, then the arborist would say it's fine to remove that tree, and then the tree would come down. So, but that's in that situation, that's the important thing, that we use sort of the arborist to be our eyes and ears, because we don't know, but they do know.
I would like to see if we can have something about invasive species dealt with, whether it be invasive tree species or invasive species that infect trees. I don't know how much reach we would have in terms of like regulating bugs and how they get into a tree, but how we deal with infected trees in those situations. When there's an invasive species that might come in, is there a way that we can write some sort of
What we have now in another chapter in the code, maybe chapter 88, the property owners are required to keep their grass cut and to keep like bugs and away. They're basically supposed to maintain their property, and if they don't do that, that's a violation. And we actually have written people up for that. And if they don't do it on occasion, we have landscapers on call who we will bring in to do it, as I said before, and then basically we charge back the property owner. But if there is if there's a condition which could result in a deleterious situation for the tree, that's really what you're getting at, which is if there's something in that area. I think obviously you want to have something that acts to sort of protect that, and do that. And just before I forget, one thing I didn't mention, we do have we do still have the issue of the significant tree list, which is something that when I was on the town EAC, we were talking about, because it's there, but what are they? Again, it's a tree which can be, because of its historic nature, because of its age, because of its specimen, because of its size, is designated essentially as a significant tree in the village. That requires the owner's consent, but a significant tree cannot be taken down under any circumstance without a permit, unlike many of the other trees. But the EAC is explicitly given the role of, formulating a significant tree list to give to the Board of Trustees for their, ultimate approval. So that's just something to think about as to whether or not there are, any trees that might come within that, and anyone can nominate a tree. A property owner can say, I have this beautiful tree in my backyard. I'd like it to be considered a significant tree. The board thinks that's the case, then they can, so recommend that to the Board of Trustees. So it's just something, again, to think about. And it acts as another means of protecting trees, because you're sort of like doing that. Other municipalities call them historic trees or trees of importance. In the village, they call them, say a significant tree list. So just something to think about.
Well, there's definitely one on Watson Avenue that should be put on the significant tree list.
That huge tree? What kind
Yeah.
of tree is that? Is that oak?
I had the tree guy come by and we were talking about it. I forget what he told me what it was, but he said that tree is probably pre-Civil War.
Yeah, it could use some pruning too.
Yeah, the property
owns
it's
it?
on, it like straddles two properties.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of neglected by both because neither want to take ownership of it. So
And a good bit of it is over the street.
yeah, well, it's huge.
Yeah.
But yeah, that tree is like stunning, and I would
It's
love
amazing. It's
to
incredible.
protect it. I mean, it's it's part of Austening's history as much as anything. So is there, going through the tree ordinance, is there a mechanism that basically chills homeowners from being able to get a permit to remove a tree simply because they don't like it anymore, or it's become a nuisance to them in some way in that they don't want to have to deal with the leaves anymore or the pine needles?
Part of that, Leilani, will depend on the size of the tree. If it's, if it's under a certain dBH, I forget what it is, maybe 6 inches, 4 inches, you can basically take the tree down. There's nothing stops you from taking that tree down. But basically, otherwise, if you just don't want the tree, you can, listen, you can put in for a tree permit that you just want to take the tree down. You may be required to replace and put something somewhere else, or put something somewhere else. But this also gets into, some other issues, because there are people who, and I heard this when I was on the town EAC, it's my backyard. If I don't want the tree, I'm going to take the tree down. It's real
Right.
simple, and who are you to tell me that I can't take the tree down in my own backyard? I'm not talking about a tree that's like on my property line overlooking the street. I'm talking about in my backyard. But the village code is fairly, limited in terms of when you can take trees down and when you can't take trees down.
Because a situation that I'm aware of is that one neighbor, they had this gorgeous, probably 50, 75 foot white pine in their yard. It was on the side, and they were tired. The pine needles were on the roof. They were tired of it. They cut it down, and they removed it. And they I don't think they went with an actual like arborist tree company, and so they yanked the stump out and all of the roots. Well, the next big rain, basically the next door neighbors, their side hill washed down into their house, and so now they're in civil litigation over who has to pay the costs of basically fixing that yard. I mean, and that's a situation where the tree, it sounds like it would have been tall enough to be allowed to take out no matter what. But it had further implications that were not really, thought about. And I think that's a situation where a tree ordinance would exactly fit.
Well, I'll tell you this, if the tree is greater than 10 inches diameter breast height, which is the diameter of the tree trunk at 4.5 feet. If it's greater than 10 inches, a permit is required to take the tree down, no matter where the tree is on private property. If
Okay.
it's less than 10 inches, generally you can take that tree down without a permit.
Okay, well, it was over 10 inches.
So then they would have needed, then they certainly would have needed a permit.
Okay, so,
I want to circle back to an earlier conversation that we had that touched on Kate's question about pests, essentially of invasive species that actually threaten to become endemic in our trees. And I'm wondering, and what you said, Stuart, about the ordinances that govern things like mowing lawns, basically keeping your property from becoming a pest to other people. Would this be slightly different because the species that attack the trees are so specific to trees and specific kinds of trees, like the pine beetle, the spotted lanternfly? It's slightly different. They affect specific kinds of trees, but they can then spread to others. The other thing, though, I'm thinking is the DEC governs this rather stringently, I believe. Kate, you probably know more about this than I do. And maybe the requirement for having a arborist get involved might be the way to take care of this without getting into gory details like no spotted lanternfly is allowed, but that if you are, as a homeowner, protecting your trees, and if you want to take a tree down, if you have an arborist, they should be able to spot this. Am I making any sense here?
No, you are. And
Yeah.
it's, the advantage of having, the arborist, we have someone who, if need be, can go out and, assist and, get in, provide information, to a homeowner if there's a question that comes up with regard to, conditions of trees or things that have to be taken care of. I do, Katie, appreciate your point. It's not
like
when
rats.
the statute talks about pests, it's
Right.
not talking about, it's really talking more about, vermin. It's not talking
Right.
about, insects. And so probably doesn't directly deal with that. But that said, if you are required to keep your property neat and clean to a certain extent, your grass not to be over 12 inches tall and things like that, that sort of plays into all of that. But I do think that, and part of this can come from you folks, is just a matter of, educating people about the trees that are on their property and what they should look for and, what they need to do and how to protect it. We can put into the code all the things like you're not supposed to pour, gasoline near the tree. You're not supposed to do this near the tree. You're not supposed to put signs on trees.
Or pave over them.
Or pave over them.
Right.
But
Which is why I was bringing up the school, but yes,
Yes, yes.
yeah, don't pay over them.
But what's interesting, because I think it's the town of Ossining specifically says that you cannot do any work within the drip line of the tree. And what they define as drip line is essentially 1 1/2 times the diameter at breast height. So if your diameter at breast height is 10 inches, your drip line is 15 feet. So basically, that's actually an interesting way to put it. So that they're basically saying you cannot do any construction within that area. You can't, you can't, and you also have to obviously protect the area if you're doing construction. There's a lot in the town, and if I would call all of you, just look at the town of Ossining's ordinance, even before you look at all the other ones. Because there's, and again, keep in mind, the town is different. It has, far more private homes, and it has a lot more tree cover than many areas in the village. But I think for some of the things that they have in there, they can be adapted for the town is the best way, for the village is the best way to say it. I think is important, because you can see that, it's important. And frankly, it's one of those ordinances where, I mean, sometimes there are things that the town has in its code, which are you'd never see in the village but here, having a somewhat similar code relating to trees, not all that bad an idea. Given that essentially, I just have to walk about, a block and a half and I'm in the village. I mean, right now I'm in the
The
incorporated.
back of my yard, I'm in the town.
Would know, yeah.
Plus, I would think that there's a lot of overlap in contractors who work both areas and having.
Oh,
Yes, if they
certainly
kind of
is.
know what they're getting into, it'll make life better for everybody.
Right. So, what I say is just take a look at the town's ordinance to get a sense of what is done there and how perhaps we can adapt that to our village.
Just circle back when we're on my taking trees out because you don't like them. Can we put Kate's giving me a little side smirk. Can there be language included that requires, in addition to having an arborist evaluate the tree, as part of the permit, that they also have like a environmental engineer come and assess the geographical impact of removing said tree, to ensure that, because it's not diseased, it's not dead, it is serving a ecological function, and removing it could have impact on the property itself, either their own or the other one, as well as assessing its unique value to the local ecology. I mean, if you start removing all the different varieties of trees, you're going to basically introduce disease, and wipe out the trees you have. I mean, nature does best when there's diversity.
Leilani, you could, if this council thought that was something to, propose, that could certainly be proposed. Let me just one thing.
Yeah.
If you're dealing with a large project, your suggestion perhaps for that kind of consultant, which would be on that project's, that applicant's dime, would be one thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you're talking about a private homeowner, that's not an inexpensive thing to do. And because they're already potentially paying to take the tree down.
Right.
So I only mention that because, and I'm not speaking for Trustee White, but I know that, there always are discussions among the board, which is, how can we make it somewhat easier for the homeowner? And so we don't want to make it too onerous, but I do think it's important. And I know that in some of these local laws, particularly with larger developments, the question is, it is often asked, one of the factors to look at in whether a permit is to be granted is, what is the impact that that tree or those trees actually have on the property where it is now?
Yeah.
And what will happen if those trees are not there? And can you successfully replace, and what can you do? That's a fair factor to look at, and those are factors that are to be listed. So I think your idea is very good. The question is just how necessarily to implement it, because I'm hesitant to impose, perhaps, if you want to call it, an additional burden on someone who may not have the financial wherewithal to do that. But at the same point, I think you want the person to be aware of what that is. There's a way around that, but I just want to bring that to your attention. That's all.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sorry, let me just finish.
Sure.
I think, if someone is requesting a permit to remove trees that are endangering their home, or are diseased or dying and would therefore become a hazard, then I don't think they need to go through a lot of extra hoops. I think the determining factor is whether or not they're removing the tree out of aesthetics or personal preference. And I think that's when it's okay to say, well, if that's the case, then you need to go through these extra hoops, because those trees are, an important feature of our community, and yes, you have the right to determine what your backyard looks like, but we're going to make sure that this is something you actually really want to do by having you go through a
Sure.
couple of extra expensive hoops.
Okay, I got you.
So,
I can
I mean, I absolutely agree with you. And there are definitely situations where trees got to go.
But Ani, can I speak
Yeah.
to, from the standpoint of homeowners who have taken out trees, primarily for my husband. Every part of the village, I suspect, is a very different situation. We live on the border of the village and the town. If we don't weed out little tiny trees, they're sprouting up all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
And so in order to build a large organic garden, my husband got permits and took down a couple of trees and then put in lots of little fruit trees. We have also assisted our next door neighbor who didn't have the money to get a tree permit to get a permit because there were trees built on the top of his retaining wall that threatened to fall down and hit our house. So I would have reasonable thresholds of seriousness.
Yeah.
If, like Stuart said, if there's a large project or that is going to be making significant changes to a considerable amount of property, then it needs to be looked at and have a lot of bells and a lot of hoops to jump through. But to have your average homeowner, too many hoops for the average homeowner to jump through is probably going to mean that eventually nobody will comply. They just won't. They won't bother getting a permit.
Yeah, I know. I absolutely agree with you.
I'm kind of curious if the tree that I'm thinking, or the tree that Leilani is describing, is the tree that I'm thinking of that I know was removed not too long ago. That was very massive, and so like what you're saying about severity of severity of the situation for a permit.
Our ordinance actually has some of that built into it already, because like Stuart talked about, it's based on the size of the tree, breast height, and if I remember correctly, it's also based on how many trees you're taking out. So
yeah, there was something in it.
So you don't want to do the same thing in every situation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I think that's, like the permit process should start with, an evaluation by licensed professionals who, and then go from there. And depending on, how that evaluation goes and what the point of removing the tree is, then that starts off a whole separate workflow. I don't think, it needs to be too onerous on the homeowner, but I think we're quickly coming to points where better decisions need to be made about the ecological viability of our area. And, as Katie, you mentioned during the Project Mover thing, if we want to be attracting or continue to attract new, younger people to our community, we have to be able to say we have the following like environmental standards, and one of those is that we protect the trees.
I think part of that, well, go ahead, Katie, sorry.
I just think I think that at what point you require an arborist to come in and evaluate the tree before you take it down. I think that needs to be very carefully considered. It's not a simple thing. And if somebody's taking down a small tree, is one small tree, does that require an arborist to come in and check it out?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree with you on that. One small tree, especially if you're on a property that has several trees, you're probably gonna actually help the other trees grow taller and stronger. But the things I'm thinking about is I've seen at least in my neighborhood, like 5 or 6 gorgeous, huge trees.
That's a different deal. Yeah.
Yeah, those have just been pulled out, and it's like, ugh.
I mean, trees serve more than just an aesthetic purpose, and I think that's part of a cultural shift again that people need to kind of have with engaging with trees. They serve an ecological purpose for our soil as well. And if we're going to engage, 10 inches, I mean, it's in comparison to what we see with other trees, it doesn't really seem like a lot, but a 10-inch tree, a diameter breast height, that's not, I mean, it's not giant, but that's, you know, it's a sizable, measurement.
20 or 30 years old.
But we have to really get into this mindset of recognizing that our plant life around us is not just there for aesthetics. And that might be something that I think as we go through with the ordinance, that's something that we might just need to work on educating the community about.
And I'm totally on board with that. I just think we need to do this in a way that that doesn't alienate the average homeowner.
Oh, absolutely.
Agreed.
Gets done what we need to get done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe
totally.
that would be what having a special tree fund for would help in dealing with some of that. You know, how do we deal with those types of different scale or different size projects when it comes to the size of the tree, the age of the tree, how we want to go about it? That might be something that a tree fund would be helpful for in dealing with some of that. I mean, I'm not sure exactly how, you know, but these are things I think we could all work out.
Well, I think
language.
It'll be really interesting to read through these various ordinances and see how other places have done that. Yeah.
So you do that. Let me have your comments. The tree fund can do a lot of different things. It can be to purchase trees. It can be to educate. It can be to replace trees. It can be to maintain trees. It can be a whole panoply of things that you want to do. But it would be in essence, a separate dedicated fund. The Board of Trustees would determine essentially what the, if you want to call it, the buyout number would be. And then that developer or property owner would make the decision that if it's simply not reasonable to do the replacement that is required, they have to pay per tree, and they put that money into the fund, and then the fund can be used, for various purposes. So that's really the benefit of the fund, because it's essentially a special fund for that. Like we have a downtown development fund, and we have, a rec fund, things like that. This would be a fund sort of along those lines. So just let me know, and I promise you I won't send you anything more right away. But unless you're interested, I mean, there are some municipalities, I must tell you, I've seen local laws from just about everywhere in New York State, but there was some places in New York I had not even heard of. But and those ones have the longest tree ordinances, like 25 pages, and they go over literally, from soup to nuts. But I don't think we have to go that far. We have enough on our plates.
It's
But
too
if,
boring.
But if I hear from you folks over the next week to 10 days or so, I'll be able to have something actually as a code for you to look at in terms of a revision, and then we can comment on that for our May meeting.
Cool. I'll be looking forward to having little teeth.
Perfect.
So we'll get a letter circulating through for the council, and we can start adding our comments and our thoughts, anything we might want to see in particular, and get that to Stuart in the next 7 to 10 days.
That'll be great. Thanks.
Perfect.
I believe that is the last thing that we have on the agenda. If there are any other questions or comments before we adjourn? No? All right, well, I guess
Good
that
meeting.
would be it for tonight, or what?
Have a
I
good
just said
month,
good meeting.
everyone.
Thank
Have a
you.
good
evening.
night.
Good evening.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye-bye.